Hello P1, hope you're doing well. Hope everything is okay. How is everybody at home? How is mommy? How is daddy? How are your brothers, your sisters? If you have auntie at home, how are they? Hope everyone is okay. Now I've come back with mathematics as usual. We've been learning months of the year, and I believe everybody now knows how many months we have in a year and how to write them in their ordinal numbers, how to write them in full, and how to write them in short. Okay? Now I've come with fractions. Say fractions. Fractions. If I want to read that word, I can blend. I start with then shin. Fraction. Fraction. So the word is now fraction. Say fraction. Fraction. All right. You know what a fraction is? A fraction is a part of a whole thing. A part of a whole. Say whole. Whole. We have another word, whole. We have this whole. This one is found on the ground. You can fall into a hole. But the hole I'm talking about is the one which has W at the beginning. It's also whole. A whole means a full thing. For example, if mommy buys for you an apple, it's a whole apple. It's a whole apple. It is full. But when you cut it into pieces, it's what we call a fraction. Those pieces are the ones we call fractions. All right? So we are meaning this whole, not the other whole where you can fall. Okay? So, as I've told you that a whole is something which is big, it is one. You can hold it when it's one. For example, I have my paper. How many do I have? I have one paper. It's a whole paper. It's a whole. That means when we are talking about fractions, one represents a whole. One paper, one orange, one mango, one watermelon, one pumpkin, one piece of bread, one apple, that is a whole. So even this paper is one, so it is a whole, okay? But when I cut this paper into pieces, I'll make fractions. I'll make different fractions. I can make as many fractions as I want, so long as I cut it, okay? Now, I'm going to fold this paper into two equal sides. I had one paper, remember? I had a whole. Now I want to have pieces. I want to have pieces. Like the way mommy buys for you an apple and tells you, share with your brother. Then you get a knife. And you people, some of you are funny. They tell you to share with your brother. You cut just a small piece and give. No, you're supposed to cut equal parts. Equal parts. So I'm cutting my paper. I'm going to make parts or pieces. And the parts I'll make, or the parts I'll get, are the ones we shall call fractions. Right. I had a whole paper. It was one. Now I've cut it into 2 parts, and they are equal parts. I have 2 parts. From the whole paper, I have now gotten 2 parts, okay? I have this part, I have another part. This is a fraction, this is another fraction. Now we are going to see, how do we call these fractions? I have 2 parts already. Now, if I want to pick one, for example, if this is my orange, I want to share with my friend, I'll give 1 piece. When I give 1 piece, I will have given 1 part out of the 2 parts. 1 part out of the 2 parts. This is how I write it. I have given my friend 1 part out of 2 parts. I had 2 parts, remember? I've given out 1. I have remained with 1. So I gave out 1 part out of 2. I remained with 1 part out of 2. This fraction here is called a half. A half. A half. What is it called? A half. A half means 1 out of 2 parts. 1 part out of the 2 parts. That is a half. Okay? Remember, I started with a whole, then I made a half. I'm going to still make more fractions. Okay? I'm going to have another fraction. And mind you, I get fractions from a whole. Each fraction I get it from a whole. I have another whole here. I have another whole. Guess what fraction I'm going to get from this whole? You don't know. So let me make my fraction. You're going to tell me. I'm folding it into equal parts. As I told you, all the parts must be equal. They must be the same. You cannot make a fraction when one part is big, another one is small. No. They must be of the same size. So I'm going to cut and get fractions out of this whole. Already cut the first one. Out of my whole, I'm making fractions. Finished. Now I have, how many parts do I have now? How many parts do I have? Do I still have 2? I had a whole. Now I've made different parts. I have 3. 1, 2, 3. I have made 3 parts. Now, out of these 3 parts, if I throw down 1, how many parts did I have? I had 3 parts. And how many have I thrown? 1 part. So I have thrown 1 part out of the 3 parts. I have thrown 1 part out of the 3 parts. And you know the name of this fraction? This fraction is called a third. A third. A third. 1 out of 3 can also be called a third. Can also be called a third. Okay? Hope you're learning something from my fractions. I had a whole. I first made a half. Now I've made a third. I'm going to make another fraction. I told you I get those fractions from a whole. I have another whole. Have you seen my whole? I'm going to make another fraction out of this whole. And mind you, you must make equal parts. Don't cut another part big, another one small. No, that one is not being fair. All the parts must be the same. They must be equal. Now I'm making another fraction out of my whole. Now I'm going to cut. Now I'm going to cut. You're going to see another fraction that I'm going to make. Making fractions. A fraction is part of a whole. I'm done. This time I've made very many pieces, very many parts. Here they are. Can you see them very well? How many are they? Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've made 4 parts out of the whole. I've made 4 parts, right? Now, I'm going to remove 1. I'm going to give 1. My friend here is asking me for 1 part. So, let me give 1 to my friend. How many parts have I given out? 1 part. How many did I have? I had 4. So, the fraction I have given out is 1 out of 4. I've given out 1 part out of 4 parts. Now, what name do we give to such a fraction? If I give out 1 out of 4 parts, it's called a quarter. A quarter. A quarter. Can we spell the word a quarter, all of us? A quarter. A, Q, U, A, R, T, E, R. There is that R after the quo. So then never write a quarter without that R. It has 2 R's. It has the first R after A and another R after E. Okay? So 1 out of 4 is also called a quarter. These are what we are going to learn today. We have learned 4 fractions. Remember, I told you a fraction is part of a whole, a part of any whole thing. If it's an orange and you cut it into 5 pieces, still you have made a fraction. If it's maybe a piece of bread, you bought bread from the supermarket and it was sliced. But even if it's sliced, it is still a whole because you buy it when it's packed, it's a whole bread. Then you start giving out the slices of bread. The slices you give are the fractions. The slices you give out are the what? The fractions. Even if they are 20 and you give out 10, still you have made a fraction. You have given out 20 pieces out of, 10 pieces out of 20 pieces. So that is also a fraction. So these are the fractions we have learned today. We said a fraction is part of a whole. And I told you that if it's a full thing, a full object, it is a what? A whole. It is called a whole. But when we cut it into pieces, we make fractions. For example, I have formed a half. I have formed a third. I have formed a quarter, right? But I can still give out as many fractions as I want. I had my 4 pieces. I have my 4 pieces here. I can decide to give out 2. I have 4. 4 of them. I can decide to give out 2. I give 1, 2. Do you know that fraction I've given out? This time I did not give out 1. Instead I gave out 2 parts out of 4. I gave 2 parts out of 4. And do you know how we name this fraction? We name it as 2 quarters. 2 quarters. Here it was a quarter because article a is used on one object. You remember that the teacher of English taught you that? A is referred to one object, but now I've given out 2. So these ones are called 2 quarters. There are 2 quarters. If I have 4 still. I still have 4. And I give out 3. 1, 2, 3. I have given out a fraction of 3 out of 4. And when we are naming it, these are 3 quarters. 3 quarters. If I have 3 parts and I give out 1, I have given out what? A third. Now, if I give out 2, which fraction have I given out? I have given out 2 out of the 3 parts. So, if I give out 1, it's a third. When I give out 2, they become 2 thirds. Don't say 2 thirds because 2 is now in a plural. So it is 2 thirds. 2 quarters because 2 is in plural. 3 quarters. But if it's 1, it's a quarter. You can even say 1 quarter, 1 half, 1 third, right? Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have learned what fractions are, how we can make fractions. I want you to make very many fractions and you write them down. You get a piece of orange or a tomato or an onion, you cut into very many parts. Write the fraction you're going to give to your friend. Write the fraction you're going to give. You can even give your mommy and you tell her, I have given you half of my orange. Daddy, I want to give you a third of my apple that you've bought for me. I've given a half of the biscuit to my brother. Make very many fractions and you write them down, all right? I love you so much. I want you to continue being good children. I will come back with another lesson about fractions.